Hello and welcome to today's telecom.
Hello and welcome to today's live presentation of the 6 essential building blocks of e-learning programs. Audio for our event will be broadcast through your computer speakers, and if you would like to use the option to dial in to listen, please call 1-877-201-7923. Today's presentation is hosted inside an Adobe Connect virtual meeting room with integrated Audio One audio conferencing. We invite you to learn more about hosting your own online events, as well as also e-learning through Meeting One's tailored conferencing and learning solutions during a brief Adobe Captivate Prime demo at the conclusion of today's presentation. We're delighted that you have joined us today, and we hope that you do enjoy our live presentation with our host, David Smith of DS Virtually. Welcome, David, and thank you for hosting us.
Luke, thank you very much. And of course, thank you all very much for joining us. Delighted to see that you're joining from Springfield, from Phoenix, from Monterey, from Houston, and Tammy saying hi there from St. Louis. I'm delighted to be joining you. I'm based here in the UK. For about the last 13 years, I've been very much involved in helping organizations make better use of learning technologies. And I'm delighted that today's webinar, we're going to focus on 6 essential building blocks of e-learning programs. And the intention that I've got for you today is really to help to hopefully inspire and motivate you to actually think maybe slightly differently to what you use to actually design and deliver your learning. But more importantly, to maybe take a step back and think about what is it that we're actually serving up as a learning experience to our learners, to our work people, to the people that actually are our sales people or our customer service people or our directors. What experiences are we giving them, and really what are some of the things that we should be thinking about when we actually do design learning? Thank you very much for taking part in the polls. You'll find that during the course of today's session, we like to ask you questions and get you interacting. And of course, you're going to want to ask questions of us. And as we go through the session, feel free, pop those into the Q&A panel, which is on your left-hand side of the screen. We'll pick up as many of those as we go along. I don't want this to be a sit down, listen to me for 40 minutes now, what questions do you have? If you've been on a webinar with me previously, you'll know that we tend to try and be as interactive as we can be. The first poll question we did ask you, what does the phrase e-learning mean to you? I think it's very important that we think about what it is we're going to talk about. We work within an industry, this learning industry, where there's a lot of phrases. And I guess if you could ask 100 people, might get 4 or 5 different versions of e-learning, or what they think e-learning is all about. To some extent digital, yes. To some extent it's something I log into a computer and I sit and do it on my own, yes. E-learning, it's something I do in a virtual classroom, yes. I personally, and there's been a bit of a debate over the year, I personally wish we'd gotten rid of e-learning, and we just talk about it's the building blocks of learning programs. It's not mobile learning, it's not digital learning, it's not e-learning, it's just learning. And as I said, as we go through the program, I hope to really help you to actually look at what are these 6 building blocks that we've identified that make up successful learning programs. The first instance is really to actually look at, well, what's causing us to have to rethink this? Many of you will no doubt have seen the actual research that came out a number of years back from Berson and Deloitte. And in it gave some very startling figures, but essentially it was saying that our modern day learner, the audiences that we're actually designing and delivering learning to, is somewhat compromised. From the point of view that they are untethered, on-demand, collaborative, and empowered. Untethered in that they're dispersed. If you think about it, in most instances, your e-learning or your audience is now going to be maybe much more global. Now, that might be more global as in they're in different states within the US. It might be they're more global because they're actually across different continents. Doesn't matter. But our audience are now actually becoming a lot more mobile from the point of view that maybe they're actually participating and taking that learning at home. Maybe they're in a coffee shop and they're actually picking up that learning. Maybe it's something they're picking up with a glass of wine over the weekend. Maybe it's something they're doing because they're home-based or remote workers. So very much the way in which we actually have to serve up learning has got to accommodate some of that. We've seen a huge move towards what I would call traditional digital learning. And for me, that is the point and click, the captivate, articulate designed kind of content where the individual sat participating in the knowledge or the learning on their own. It's self-paced. There's been a huge uptake in that, and there are companies across the world that make an absolute fortune from designing and hosting these digital learning journeys. But I'm going to challenge you today that digital learning is not enough on its own in most instances. We've got learners that have become a lot more collaborative. You know, we work and we live in a world which is much more social. And as a result, as human beings, we very much get more from actually being collaborative. And we get even more in terms of learning if we're actually working together. Now that could be self-paced. It could be something we're learning on a wiki or a discussion forum, or it's something in the social side of your learning management system. But equally, it could be something that actually takes place in the middle of a breakout room right in the middle of a virtual classroom. And of course, our learners are becoming much more empowered. If you consider a learner in today's world has the internet access available to them. You know, gone are the days where we as learning and development professionals held this Pandora's box of knowledge, if you like, around the subject that we wanted to actually educate our people with. You know, if you're actually going to run a program on conflict management, and you have a conflict management model which is the Kilman model, then there are a huge number of resources already out there in the public domain that a learner looking to actually address conflict management could actually watch videos, articles, WordPress, lots of different things. Add on to that the fact that we've got all of these different technologies that become available to us, and that gives us quite a lot in terms of, you know, the challenge that faces us as modern learning architects. It gives us, however, a series of benefits. And those benefits are really what we've actually been able to actually take advantage of over this last number of years in terms of, you know, the fact of being able to use digital technologies to create e-learning means that we actually are able to sort of scale up our learning offer. In a lot of instances, it actually helps us to actually automate that learning offer. We just enroll a learner in a program, and the program or the LMS takes care of it. It actually feeds information, knowledge, tasks and activities as it needs to along the way. It means that we've got much more of a global reach. You know, gone are the days where we used to actually pool everyone into a training room in a head office location. You know, we're now actually able to actually take the learning to the learner rather than actually having to bring the learner to us. And that's something that's been changing for quite a while now. But again, it's giving us and it's giving our learner a sense of convenience. We don't have our facilitators to have to move around the globe. We don't have our learners to move around the globe. And it means the learning can actually be parsed out in a much simpler way. But that comes with disadvantages, and we're going to be talking about some of that as we go through today's session. The digital technologies help us to get a much higher level of visibility, if you like. You know, the tracking tools that actually exist within a lot of these learning platforms. And that visibility is great, but I think we don't use it well enough. And again, there's a bit of a trend been coming up in the last sort of 3 years or so around learning analytics and what those visibilities and reports actually can give us. And again, we're going to talk about that a little later. And the final piece is it allows us to optimize out our learning offering. You know, if you consider, if we actually, instead of actually having to deliver training in a face-to-face format, we actually now can deliver it virtually, or we can deliver it using digital learning. It means that we optimize the talent, we optimize our own faculty pool, or the resources that are required in order to design and deliver that particular learning intervention. But it comes as a bit of a challenge for us, because as this modern learning architect, it means that from an L&D perspective, what we've got to do is change with the times. It means that we've got to upskill and reskill ourselves in order to be able to take advantage of these tools and technologies. And what I'd like to do is just get a sense from you in terms of who you particularly are as an audience. You know, I mean, you've signed up to this webinar today, which is 6 essential building blocks for e-learning programs. What I'd like to do is get a sense for you in terms of what best describes your role and actually what role you perform. Now, the one on the left, the what best describes your role, if you're like me, you didn't choose to come into learning and development as a career choice from leaving school or leaving university. It was something that, as a result of your success within business, maybe you migrated into a learning and development role, maybe something you accidentally fell into. Or the other side of it is you chose to be an L&D. You went to university, you got your bachelor's degree or your master's, and that's the route that you've taken. And what we see is generally in a lot of organizations, very much the first option is where a lot of people in L&D actually come from. And that's fine, but what it means is that we've missed out some of that formal learning that we may have needed or may have had if we'd actually done a master's in learning design, for instance. In terms of the second poll, what role do you perform in your organization? You might have a singular role, which actually just means that you're designing learning or you're managing the learning function. But you may also have a multidiscipline role where you design, you deliver, you support, and you manage the learning function. I just want to get a sense for you because I hope that each and every single one of you on the call today takes something either differently. You may take something that everyone else takes from it. But I'm hoping that what we can actually do is to give you something that's actually going to make a difference for you back in the actual business. So let's step back a second and think about, as a modern learning architect, you know, what are some of the approaches, some of the thoughts that we can actually think of? If you don't, and obviously as we looked at that, a large percentage of you, like me, came into learning and development more by accident than by purpose. There are some great resources available to you, and we're going to give you links to some of those in terms of, you know, what are the foundations that we can actually think about that can actually help us to consider learning. You can see the link at the bottom of this actual slide. At the end, we'll share with you a PDF copy of the slides. So don't worry about grabbing that right now. You'll be able to actually then go into it later. But Richard E. Mayer, University of California professor, back in 2012, actually came out with these 12 principles of multimedia design. And he talks about things like the multimedia principle, the signaling principle, the pre-training principle, the modality. There are 12 principles there. But in essence, the one thing to take away from it, if you haven't seen this before, is that people learn better when certain things are happening. And it's important, if we're designing learning for the modern learner, we need to be very much aware of these principles. So we need to be thinking about how does what we put on paper or how we actually put into a video or what we actually put on screen, how does it help the learner? Because yes, we can provide a lot of knowledge, a lot of information, but if we don't get it right, that's where maybe some of that content isn't going to actually help the learner. If it doesn't help the learner, it doesn't help the business. If it doesn't help the business, that's where potentially the business turns around and asks us, what's happening? Are we not getting it right? And we maybe have to then develop or to demonstrate ROI, and challenges around budget get a little bit more difficult. The other sort of set of principles where you to actually really get into, and if you haven't already done so, are the 9 levels of 9 events of instruction from Gagne. Essentially, these are elements that are often seen as being required for effective learning. Learners become much more likely to retain that knowledge, be engaged, develop the skills, and we'll come back to 1 or 2 of these as we go through the 6 building blocks to actually see, well, what did that actually give us in terms of that. For today's purpose, we're going to actually talk about the Adobe Digital Learning Experience Suite, the trifecta, if you like, of Adobe Captivate, Adobe Captivate Prime, which is the learning experience system, and Adobe Connect, which is the virtual classroom. And, you know, in terms of when we actually, if we think about it, what we actually need to do as this modern learning architect, we need to be able to create content that we're going to be actually providing to our learner audience. We need to manage that content and manage the learners and manage the different cohorts that are actually going to go through the actual programs that we're going to be offering them. We then need to actually deliver the learning to the learner. So whether that is learning that is digital or whether that is learning that is actually virtual in terms of a virtual classroom. And then clearly we want to track it. But I'm going to go much deeper than just tracking. And I think, you know, if you've got a learning management system that has got a lot of different elements to it, you know, to some extent, depending on which system you're using, you'll be able to do pretty much all of these. But I want to dive a little deeper into why I think these building blocks are more essential. One of the things to think about, you know, think about all the different tools that are actually available to us as the modern learning architect. One of the things that we've got to be very mindful of, and there was some research that's been done annually from a lady here in the UK, Jane Hart, and she does this annual top 200 tools for learning. And again, you'll have this on the PDF that you'll be able to download at the end of the session. You know, and there are a whole myriad of different tools that we can actually deploy for learning. You know, whether it's YouTube or whether it's Google, we can use Slack to deliver learning. You know, we've got so many of the different Microsoft products. There are lots of different tools out there, and the real challenge to us comes from the fact of, have we got too many resources, and do we have the right mindset, do we have the right skill set to actually be able to take advantage of those resources? And that's the real key to it. Because if you consider, if you have all these different tools, you know, a little bit like this gentleman has got all of these different ladders, and he doesn't know how to use them, then it doesn't matter how many tools, how many resources you've got available to you. If you don't know how to get the best from them, they become ineffective. And in essence, what that does is gets us to think that from a modern learning architect, what we've got to be thinking about is, what is the mindset that we bring when we design and deliver impactful e-learning programs? What is the tool set that we're going to actually leverage? And how are we going to actually deliver it to the learner audience? And importantly, a factor that often gets missed, how do we develop the skill set to actually use these tools or to leverage them to their maximum? You know, and part of the work that I do with a lot of organizations is around how we help people to design and deliver more impactful virtual classroom content. Often what will happen is learning development will be a case of, you know, yeah, we delivered that training face-to-face. Now you're going to have to deliver it virtually, and we're going to give you Adobe Connect as a tool to do it. Now go and do it. And we get challenged by, well, why is that not successful? You know, the programs that we deliver are very much around the upskilling piece of developing that skill set. But look, you're here to see what are these 6 building blocks that we're going to talk about. We're going to dive into each and every single one of them individually. There'll be other things that I'm going to be asking you in terms of questions. As I said previously, if you have a question for me, pop it into the Q&A panel. I'll give you my email towards the end, LinkedIn detail. You can connect with me there, and then we can continue the conversation beyond. But for a moment, let's look at what are these 6 building blocks, and let's dive into each one individually. First one we actually need to think about is, how do we actually integrate gamification into our learning? You know, and we'll talk about what that actually means in a second. Second one is social. The third are learning journeys. The fourth is learner access, or access to the actual learning itself. The fifth is instruction. And then the sixth is visibility. So let's go into each of these individually. And let's just get you thinking about how you use those within your own organization. So the first and foremost is gamification. And again, this is one of those labels that often can be a little confusing, or something that can actually just be a little different, or mean something different to me to what it means to you. So go ahead and answer the poll there. When you hear the word gamification used in learning, What does it mean for you? I'm pretty certain that we're going to get slightly different answers, and that's fine. Because of course it depends on what reference we're coming at. It depends what we've seen. You know, we may have a belief that gamification is one thing, and really what I want us to do, as I said, is very much the intent here is to motivate and inspire you to think deeper about how we use these particular building blocks. Rita, seeing your comment there, something's wrong with our internet connection. Is this session being taped? It is being recorded by the virtue that you've actually joined us in the session. Afterwards, you will get access to the recording. It will automatically be emailed to you. But if I look at the responses, when you hear the word gamification, a fun type of learning, you know, fun and learning, a fun type of interaction, games which I typically loathe, learning material that's transformed into a game, engagement, learning games to engage learners actively, a fun type of interaction, a buzzword, you know, and you know, I like a lot of these responses. A buzzword, yes, we fall into this in our industry, and I'm pretty certain that if you go into pharma and you go into finance, we've got pretty much the same. There'll be buzzwords that every industry uses. You know, but gamification is a lot more than just games itself. And when you actually look into what is being used, what is you can actually deploy, gamification goes beyond just playing games. And in fact, the last thing you want to do is to create a game out of content that is dry and dull and boring, because let's think, oh well, if we make it a game, it will make it more enjoyable, people will be much more engaged. That's just rubbish. You know, if it's dull, dry and boring material, putting it into a game just doesn't make that difference. What we mean by gaming techniques, or gamification in fact, is a lot more than just games and the art of putting something into a sort of fun activity. You know, gamification is actually portrayed by many in the industry as being badges, leaderboards, levels, rewards, and challenges. As I say, you know, for me, I want to give you a lot more information, a lot more knowledge that you can actually take away with you. In Captivate Prime, you know, we have the ability to actually gamify the learning by awarding badges, by getting people to different levels of expertise. Now, this isn't something that actually gets designed by itself. It's something you've got to set. These are different parameters that you actually have to put in place. But if you imagine, if you turn around and, you know, take it from me, you know, within our virtual classroom expertise, you know, we actually help organizations where we might have someone that comes in as, let's say, a novice, and we want to move them from novice to black belt. You know, so what we'd actually do is we'd put in places where, you know, people are coming to the actual dojo to actually learn how to be excellent virtual classroom facilitators. And they move from yellow belt to red belt to black belt, and then they become at that level. You know, that's gamification. That's one way of actually rewarding the individual, rewarding that learner for taking and consuming the learning. Another way of doing it is through leaderboards. And here you can see that Greg is ahead of Brandon, who's ahead of Heather, which is, in this instance, you. If you were actually Heather, this is your view as you've logged into this. But it's showing where you are on that learning scale. And, of course, what it does is it puts in place that kind of friendly competition. You know, again, you've got to think about your particular audience and will they respond to that? There's absolutely no point in putting competition out there if you've got an audience that are not competitive. There's no point in putting in leaderboards if people aren't, you know, leaderboards around people actually putting contributions around a blog or a post or an article if people aren't posting. It becomes very much redundant. There's no real advantage to doing it. And if you want to learn a lot more about gamification, and this webinar is not about gamification on its own, it's about 6 building blocks, then a fantastic resource, and this is a very good friend and colleague of mine, is a gentleman called Cal Cap. And when I say colleague, we don't work together. He's one of those experts in our field that I've had the great pleasure of actually meeting. Carl's assistant director at Bloomsburg University. He teaches classrooms at the university around the gamification of learning. And, you know, as Carl defines gamification, is the careful and considered integration of game characteristics. It's not necessarily creating a game where we actually bring Jeopardy alive on screen for the actual learners, although that is gamification itself. You know, it's doing it in a careful and considered way. You know, there's an old phrase that we actually use in terms of learning, and that just because you can does not mean that you should. You know, it's about making sure we actually are doing it for a deliberate reason. We're doing it because it adds more and it gives us something. And Kathy, yeah, Bloomsburg, yeah, great. As well as that, I want to give you there's lots of great research out there around, you know, case studies from organizations like SAP, who saw a 40% increase in usage, 96% increase in community feedback. Omnicare, 100% participation rates. Ford saw increased actions move by 100% in 5 weeks. These are all different case studies that, you know, there's a particular website, and I'm going to give you an opportunity to just grab the link there. You can click on that, click Browse To, and it will open up a web browser for you that will take you to a web page that has 90 different case studies around the subject of gamification. I'd encourage you to go and look at that, not right now. Click it, bookmark it, come back to the webinar. But I'd encourage you definitely to capture that because it's a great resource for you to go into and look at how other organizations have been successful in moving learner engagement and knowledge retention and learners in a way that is extremely positive. So grab that link, you go from there. But as I say, be very cautious about how you gamify your learning. There's absolutely no point in making something into a game, spending the time, the money, and the resource if it does not make sense, if it doesn't make the value, if it doesn't get that learner to capture that learning quicker or reinforce it more or get them to apply it. And the world is awash with instances where we've actually got learning that's been delivered in a certain way because somebody thought this would be a great way to do it. Go back to just because you could does not mean that you should. Okay, so our second category, our second building block is that of social. And again, I'm going to suggest that to some extent, social has been one of those things that has become a bit of a buzzword again. You know, the whole social aspect of learning. Or social learning has become another buzzword that's out there. So again, you know, what I'd like to do, get a bit of a sense for you in terms of what are you doing in your organization. Social might not form part of your current offering, but I hope by the way of talking about this as a particular building block, it'll encourage and motivate you to consider, and please note, all of these building blocks are things for you to consider. I'm not saying they have to be in every single program. Don't look at it and think, okay, David's given us a formula here of 6 different building blocks that need to be in every single program. It's about selecting what's the most appropriate for your learner audience, for the content that you're designing and delivering, for the way in which you need to deliver the learning, for the speed and the efficacy of how you actually need the learning to be delivered. So seeing some of the audience, we don't design any social into our learning offerings. Now, I know that some of that may actually come from the fact that maybe what you have tools-wise doesn't help you. You know, there might be, you may have a learning management system that doesn't have a social part to it. It might be that you have a disparate number of different technologies that you're having to use in order to actually, almost to actually manufacture that social aspect of learning. And delighted of some of the examples that you're actually sharing with us there, in terms of you know, discussion forums, breakout rooms. I mean, clearly, going back to what I said right at the very beginning, e-learning programs, we're talking about using multiple ways of actually getting the learning to take place. It's not just e-learning from that point and click, click next kind of format. Discussion forums. all of these different elements really are what actually contributes to social, because if you think about it, social is something that it just is. Our life and our work is very much social. Think about it from the point of view. If you've been watching television and you just watched the latest movie blockbuster, or you've gone to a restaurant, or you've had an experience at the weekend that you've been hiking in the mountains, or you've been skiing and you've been skiing or whatever. It doesn't matter what it is. You immediately want to share that with your workmates. Not all of it. You might not share it all, but we're social animals. We like the idea of it. That's why Facebook and Twitter exists. We like to share. We share the good and we share the bad. But learning, social makes a huge difference when you actually get it right in learning. Because what can actually happen is all of a sudden we start building communities of learners. And again, some of the research, Harvard created a learning program called HBX Core. And within that, what they actually did was they kind of stepped back a little from some of the learning. They created a social aspect of it where the learners themselves took responsibility for asking and answering questions. Now, this is something that, I remember 5-6 years ago being at a training conference, and I had someone at the back of the room ask the question, how do we formalize informal learning? And it's like, well, hang on, if you're trying to formalize informal learning, does that not mean that you change it from informal learning to formal learning? I don't know. But I mean, social's one of those things as well. We've got to let go. We've got to allow the community to build. And the Harvard research was showing that in more than 90% of cases, questions that were being asked were being answered by the peer group, and they were being answered accurately and precisely. And that's a great element, because what was actually happening there is that the learners were demonstrating their ability to be those experts. To say, well, look, yeah, I've taken this learning, I've consumed it, I've learned it, and as a result of that, I can actually then teach others. And there's nothing more magical than having a learner have been taught something to then teach it on themselves. So that kind of pay it forward. And again, you see the link there. If you click on that, that'll take you out to the actual web page with a lot more of that research around HBX Core. And when we actually think about social and putting social into our programs, there's a lot more that we can actually do with having social as one of those building blocks. Now, some organizations have dropped into the myth, which is, and Myra, I'll bring that link up, thank you. Let me just bring it up a second. There we are. Is that, yeah, not everyone's going to be actually interested in using social. It's only going to be the millennials. Well, and I'm sure you can probably see it on camera here. My hair is grey, and that's because I'm 53 years young. I regard myself as one of the world's oldest millennials. Because if you're telling me that a millennial enjoys using technology, is always on a device, iPod, iPad, whatever, that's me. I'm one of those people. Millennial is again, it's a label that we seem to, or that has been created. That's fine. I understand the need for labels. But we cannot turn around and say, the millennials will only learn a certain way. The baby boomers a different way. Gen X a different way. No. Social is something that we are as human beings. So social will actually it does have something that appeals to not just the millennials. It does appeal across the different generations. And what it helps us to do is to actually build up this bank of knowledgeable employees, those champions, those people within our business that know, well, okay, when we're talking about negotiating, they know the sharp end of negotiating because they're the salespeople and negotiating with the clients, selling our products. So yes, we can teach them the negotiation techniques, but they're the ones that are applying it. And if we get this community of learners together and get them sharing and get them discussing and get them asking questions to one another, we build up a much higher bank of knowledge that actually exists within our organizations. And, one of the things that that really got me thinking about this a number of years back was when I actually read the book Show Your Work by Austin Kleon. If you haven't seen it, he has got a video on YouTube. He talks about bringing your artistry to work. But one of the things that has sort of come around the last sort of 3-4 years is this whole concept of working out loud, you know, of sharing the work that you've got. And what reading the book from Austin Kleon did for me is it got me thinking about how I design learning where I want the learner to go off and create something. It might be a video, it might be an article, it might be a blog post, it might be just responding to a question, but I want them to show off. Not show off in a sort of pompous way, not showing off and being very brash, but I want them to demonstrate that they're able to do what we're helping them to learn to do. So I want them to be able to role play. I want them to be able to run a scenario. I want them to be able to demonstrate that the skills we're helping them to develop or the behaviors we're trying to get them to build up on are definitely happening. And, you know, again, one of the great things that we see that takes place in these learning platforms is the ability to give the learner an activity that they have to do something. They have to upload a video. They have to share their knowledge within an article. They have to respond to questions. And as long as we design that in, and then we design it into maybe an element of gamification where we're actually giving people those rewards because they've actually contributed, and those likes and those thumbs up, which you see, which are almost like that Facebook-style mentality, suddenly we're taking building block one of gamification, adding social, and we're actually getting a double effect. And what we're doing is creating a much better product as a result of that. A third building block is that of creating journeys for our learners. You know, now journeys are one of those things that, you know, we probably do, but what I want to do is be very clear when I actually talk about journeys, what I am talking about. I'm talking about mapping out the learning for the learner. So the learner sees the scope of what we're asking them to do. What they're able to see is, well, what's the individual work or the individual tasks that we've got assigned to you? So it might be what they actually need to come as prerequisite, what knowledge they need to gain before they come to the virtual classroom. It might be what pre-work do they need to do before they come to that 2-day face-to-face program. It doesn't matter what it is, but it's signposting and giving them knowledge and awareness that that is a prerequisite, that forms part of the actual learning that takes place. The learning journey as well should also show them what they actually have from a group task. You know, what are the group elements that we're going to be asking them to do? You know, we're asking them to contribute in the discussion forums. We're asking them to share their work. We're asking them to upload. But also it should actually map out what are the steps that they're likely to take. And what I'd like to get is a bit of an understanding from you in terms of, you know, what are you doing in your learning offerings to signpost the learner journey? It might be you're doing something. It might be your platform does it for you. So what you actually do is you create a series of steps within your learning management system, and you basically allow the people to go through that. It might be, and I'm seeing some answers come in, and thank you very much for that, you create a process map, you create a simple flow chart. I've heard of organizations using mind maps and providing those as a visual reference, you know, and one of the things that I've really looked at from our organization perspective is how much more can we motivate and inspire our learner audience to let them understand what they're actually going to be doing, where they're going to go as part of this learning journey. And that in itself makes a huge difference to whether the learner completes that learning journey or not. And you know, I bet if I was to actually take a survey of you, not going to do it, but if I was going to take a survey of you, how many of you have actually, at some point or another, started a MOOC or a massive open online course, how many of you actually completed it would get a very low completion rate? And I think part of that is because possibly some of those don't do a great job of signposting out that learning. So what I want to do is, as we go through this, is give you some some direction, excuse the pun, in terms of putting these journeys in place and the real reason behind it. And some of that goes back to that whole Gagne's 9 levels and, you know, the whole sense of Mayer. You know, people will learn better if what we actually do is show them the red thread that weaves throughout the program. I remember when I first joined the sales training organization that I started my career in learning with. What actually happened was my first manager, John Marshall, said to me, when you're designing your learning, make sure you can demonstrate what is the red thread that weaves throughout the learning program. In other words, can you make the linkage between the piece of e-learning or piece of pre-work that you're asking the audience to do and why it's important for them to do it? You know, I pretty much, and let me ask you, just put your thoughts into chat here, chat on the right-hand side. How many of you are challenged with your learners not completing pre-work? Or they're not consuming everything that you've asked them to consume in the learning journey? How many of you experience that? Plenty of yeses, plenty of yeps. I guess I had my light bulb moment probably about 9-10 years ago when, yeah, yeah, a groan there from Cara. Making sure you identify this red thread, and what I mean by that is if you imagine that you've got a garment and you've got the red thread stitching down the garment, you know, it's weaved all the way through the program. People can actually see why there's a link or a correlation between the piece of, you know, it might be a short video you've asked them to watch before coming to the class or coming to the first session. Let me give you an example. If as a learning group we're actually going through a program in conflict management, and let's say that what I've done is I've created a video or I've gained a video from the web on the 5 stages of conflict management from the Thomas Kilmann model. And I put that as pre-work. And before you come to the virtual classroom session, I want you to watch the video. If I put that into my learning management system in the conventional way and say, right, step 1, watch the video. Step 2, come to the virtual classroom. If I'm not explicit enough, if I don't show the red thread, the link between why do I want people to watch this video and then what we're going to be doing with that knowledge that they gain from watching that video in the live virtual classroom, then people will drop out. People will not complete that activity. And what I realized was if you actually turn around and give them that red thread, so that they, and in this instance it was, step 1 is you're going to watch this video. The purpose and reason for that is in the virtual classroom, we're going to put you straight into role plays. The knowledge that you gain from watching this video will be the basis on which you actually do the role play. That demonstrates that red thread. And what that does is move our learners to the point of actually having a much more engaging learning experience. And what it did was it got me thinking, and there's some research from DDI that I want to share with you. The Global Leadership Forecast in 2011 found that organizations that have highly effective development programs use 32% more methods of development. In other words, they're using multiple resources and multiple ways of engaging with people. And it's not about the quantity, it's about the quality. And at that, you know, back in 2011, what I started doing was looking at it from the point of view of, hang on, can we actually give people a better quality of learning experience? Can we design it so it's a higher quality? Can we design it where they have much more knowledge and information available to them? And what that does, and that really got me bitten into this whole concept of designing impactful and effective learning journeys. It made a huge difference. And what we'd like to do with that is again, the DDI research, be better than average. If you want to Google that, you can pick it up quite easily. But the learning journey, we have got to make sure that our learners know what is required of each step. But one of the things for you to think about with that is don't show them the entire staircase. You know, you don't need to know what the whole staircase actually looks like for you to take the first step in that learning. And one of the things, again, I find that a lot of learning systems actually challenge us with is where they actually provide the entire learning. The learner logs in and they see the 300 steps that they've got to take on this journey. And they sit there and they go, my God, this is a lot of stuff I've got to do over the next 3 weeks, 4 weeks, 5 weeks, whatever the length of the learning is. Learners don't need to see that. If you can, within your system, have it time released. Have it dependent. So they get module 1 is dependent on them having completed the pre-work. I don't mean dependent as in you'll kick them out, but they see the link. So that it's not, Monica, so it's not overwhelming. It's something that actually all they're seeing is what they need to consume within that period of time. What that is likely to do is to allow us to have a much more quality design of our actual learning, which means we're more likely to get that knowledge created better. Some of the platforms, they'll actually help you to publish the content in a much better way. But again, part of it in terms of, from our perspective as a modern learning architect, those platforms are going to be much more intuitive. It must be easy for us to actually create that content. What I've seen is a lot of organizations get bedded down with tools and technologies where you need a maths degree to actually figure them out. So we've really got to be thinking about how much more intuitive, how much quicker, how much more quickly can we make this content. I wanted to share this with you. This is a fantastic way to actually present the learning journey. This actually is a great example from the Garforth Academy, their art department. And what it actually is they've taken the concept of the metro, or in the UK we call it the tube station. They've taken this concept of using a layout from a tube station or a metro to demonstrate the learning journey. I mean, it's simple, it's very impactful, it's very visual, but I guarantee you that if you were a student at this art department, you're looking at this and thinking, great, I can see what I'm having to do, I can see where, it's just, again, think about how we provide it. How we can do that makes a huge difference to the learner in terms of how they actually get motivated or impacted to do the session. Building block number 4 is access. Now, what I mean by access is if you consider right here, right now, we can think about accessing learning taking place on pretty much any device that we've got. Whether it's our iPad, whether it's our smartphone, doesn't really matter. It might be a laptop, it might be a desktop. Again, what I'd like to do is get a sense from you in terms of what is it you're having to work with at the moment. If I say to you about learning programs, and your learning program might be a combination of face-to-face, virtual classroom, digital, if I'm going to get access to additional learning from you within your organization, how do I access that currently? And I've only put 3 options up here. It might be that they're on some sort of shared drive. We're going to point you out to our intranet, or it'll be on SharePoint or Google Docs or Google Drive. You might have to log into your learning management system, or you might be able to log into your LMS, but there's an app as well. So thinking about 3 completely different levels of learner experience in terms of how and where they can actually access content. Because, going back to that research from Berson right at the very beginning, our learners, the modern learner, is untethered. There's that whole sense of, I need to do the learning, but should it be tethered to the fact that I need to be at my desk to do the learning? And the reality is that these learning platforms that are much more available to us actually allow us to serve up the learning in a much different way. Going back to this whole sense of how do we actually keep our learners engaged and motivated, however they're going to access the learning and all of the different components of the learning, that navigation and that access must be very easy for them to actually use. If we make it difficult, if we make it convoluted, we're less likely to be successful. Let me give you a very, very quick example. I was working with BP's Leadership Academy, and they had a digital technology which was called Stratosphere. And it was one of those avatar-based programs. So it was a little bit like Second Life, or if you're familiar with the avatars on Nintendo Wii, what you actually had to do is you had to create your own avatar in your own sort of persona. So you got everything from changing hair color and the clothes that you wore, and you created this cartoon character kind of thing. And then that cartoon character had to navigate an offshore drilling platform. And as a result of moving this character across the offshore drilling platform, you then were able to access learning. That was a very poor example of where using these tools can be very prohibitive. Partly because of cost, partly because of the amount of man-hours that were put into it, but wholeheartedly because the learner audience, who were all graduates, immediately went, no, hang on, this is too difficult. Why do I need to create this character to access the e-learning? Because that's effectively what they were doing in the program. And it became something that just became so obviously wrong in terms of it. If the learner thinks it's too difficult or too much of a challenge, or we put obstacles in the way, the chances are the learning is not going to be completed. The second part in terms of that access is people need to know where they stand. How much have they completed in this learning journey? Does the learning system actually pick up where they stopped? Or do they actually have to go back into that resource and start it all over again? You know, in terms of it, making sure that they actually see themselves on leaderboards and how far they're advancing from one level to the next, all adds up to learner engagement. And part of that means for us, what we need to do is to educate them on the best way to actually leverage the learning. So very, very often what I see and hear are organizations that roll out the learning to the actual learner, and the learner has got to figure it out for themselves. Yes, they're logging into some form of platform, but have we truly given them the knowledge, the experience for them to take advantage of that? You know, sometimes it just needs an orientation session. It might need something like a quick start guide that you can actually provide to people. You know, those are things that actually really are important, you know, because we've got to educate the learner to use these tools in a great way. Conscious, I'm not seeing any questions, so hopefully I'm doing everything okay. If there are questions, please go ahead, put them in the Q&A on the left-hand side. You know, I'm picking up on any comments as we're going through, but I'm going to step us into building block number 5. And this is instruction. Now, some of you may be turning around and saying, well, hang on a second, David. I thought you talked about e-learning programs. Why are we talking about instruction as being a building block? So, I'll answer that, and I will, but just in a moment. So if you provide 100% digital learning, do you also provide the facilitator with access to that learning itself? So you may have created a learning program which includes face-to-face, virtual, you know, it includes some form of instruction, but you're also giving them access, the learners access to a learning management system which may have discussion forums and access to other pieces of e-learning and videos and PDFs and job aids and how-to guides and all the rest of it. But do you give the facilitator the same access? And I'm delighted to see that 100% of you are saying, yes, we do. I've come across quite a few companies that have actually turned around in the past, and what they've done is they've built and designed the program, and they've not given the facilitator access to it. The learners get access to it. Well, hang on, how can the facilitator support the learner if they've not got the access? If they're not seeing, they're not aware of what other learning the learners are actually picking up on. And it's an important part for us to really consider in terms of our design. And part of that really goes, this is one of my favorite sayings when it actually comes to learning. You know, if you think about it, today's learner, in the vast majority of times, what we're actually doing is helping them to develop knowledge. We're either giving them new knowledge or we're enhancing the knowledge that they already have around a certain topic, a skill, a behavior. And Goethe actually came up with a statement, which is, knowing is not enough, we must apply. Being willing is not enough, we must do. In other words, just because we know something, if we don't know how to apply it, does that mean that we actually can do something with it? And that becomes a huge challenge to us. So let's go into that, and let's get us to think about it. If we are helping this knowledge worker to acquire knowledge, we are helping them, and we want them to be able to process that knowledge. In other words, to actually now start thinking about how that 5 steps of conflict management, or the negotiation tactic we're going to be using, or how to run a customer call. Have we given them the opportunity to practice it, to role play it, to run through scenarios? Because if we haven't, and we've given them the knowledge, we've helped them to acquire it, but we've not helped them to process it, or going back to Gagne, that we've actually helped them to practice, how on earth can we expect them to actually apply it? If you think about most learning nowadays, it's about acquiring the knowledge, processing it, and applying it. And if we miss the middle piece for the learner, there's no instruction, in other words, that's where it falls down. We can provide learners with lots of knowledge, but if they haven't been able to process it and put it into their working role, they're not able to actually then take that skill and apply it. And that becomes a real challenge for us in the business. And if you think about instruction, traditionally we'll think about instruction as being very much traditional face-to-face. But there's instruction that we can have, and it works within our learning management systems, where we have instruction that's digital. We can actually have discussion forums. We can have ask the facilitator. We can have, questions being posted and answered in the actual learning management system. That's where the digital instruction takes place. The other component, of course, is virtual instruction, when we actually do that using a virtual classroom like Adobe Connect. And that's all great, but all of these different elements of instruction are a vital part of helping to take that learner's knowledge, process it, and for them to be able to apply it. And it also gives us the ability for us to actually have live interaction together. Now that live interaction will take place obviously during the virtual classroom, and or a face-to-face event. In elements of that, we'll use things like breakout rooms. And if you're using a virtual classroom platform that doesn't have breakout rooms, unfortunately you're a little bit disadvantaged in that sense, because it's that collaborative piece of learning which really makes a huge difference. When you've actually got learners that are all doing the same job role, they're all salespeople, they're all customer service people, they're all marketing people, and we're training them how to do a certain thing. If we're helping them to learn collaboratively, they learn together, they apply together. It makes for great work. The final building block is one of visibility. And this is one where I think so very often these learning platforms have a fantastic ability for us to use what is always referenced as the reporting or tracking feature. And what I'd like you to do is, within your organization, how would you describe how you use the reporting or tracking feature? So this is the element within your learning management system that gives you visibility. But I want us to go deeper, and that's why I've called this building block visibility. I want to go deeper than just picking out that, yes, we've got this detail, that someone did complete, that someone has done steps 1, 2, 3, 4, that they haven't done step 5 yet. Okay. So seeing not well, thank you for your honesty there. We use it for auditing, find out how many members have paid for the webinar versus non-members. We get attrition, growth, and the likes of that. We generate reports. One of the things that, and really what I want us to do here, is think about it from the point of view that these tools help us to give learner visibility. Now, that learner visibility will give you things like, I've seen how far through the learning path they are. I see which components they've consumed. I see, how far up the leaderboard they've got. But I want us to think far deeper about it. Visibility is one of those things where it should give us an indicator for being able to support learner difficulty in a different way. Maybe for the facilitator to be able to interject, to actually be able to think about it from the point of view that, if a learner is having difficulty in completing a task, let's maybe reach out to them. Let's track their progress, but then give the actual facilitator an opportunity to interject and to continue to support the learner. They may have been together in a face-to-face session. They may have been online together in a virtual. But that digital instruction piece that I was talking about in the last building block, it gives the facilitator an opportunity to interject, to continue support, and for us to actually move the learner along. It might be something that needs just a very simple clarification of a question for that learner. It might be something that needs just a very simple explanation for that learner to move them along. And, of course, I appreciate that in everything that we do, what this means is it might mean us having to tweak and change and adjust the way in which we actually think about these things. Again, one of the trends that's really coming to the fore in these last couple of years has been around learner analytics. We've got vast amount of information that these learning management systems and tools can actually give us. It's whether people are engaged in a particular program. It's things like, how have they actually completed and who's completed, how many have enrolled versus completion and all the rest of it. And that's all very, and learning time spent. And that's all very well and great. But one of the things about that is when we've got that data, we've then got to be able to use it. We've got to be able to apply it. We've got to be able to harness it. And some research that's been getting done since 2014 at least has been the Global Sentiment Survey that's done by the L&D people here in the UK, from Donald Taylor. And in 2019, the three factors that we're actually talking about global sentiment, what will be hot in the workplace learning in 2019, the one that stood out for me was learning analytics. It came out of nowhere straight into third place in this survey. We'll provide you the link to the survey in the actual handouts or the follow-up email. But that gives us information that we can actually respond with, information we can use. So we talked about using Captivate, Captivate Prime, and Connect. I'm going to pause in just a moment and give you an opportunity to actually hear from Luke, who's going to share with you that you can join us in an actual demo at the end. And Luke, let me just pause a second and let you put out that offer, and then I'll come back to just finalize our webinar.
Great. Thank you very much, David. As you mentioned, we're going to interject momentarily just for a quick announcement. We're going to be opening up a brief live demonstration in the Adobe Connect room of the Adobe Captivate Prime software. We invite you to join us if you have any questions, and if you'd like to learn more about Adobe Captivate Prime, you can go ahead and select Join the Live Session now, or if you'd like to schedule another time in the future, you can select Schedule Demo. And now, Dave, we'll go ahead and we'll turn it back over to you to answer any questions that that anybody may have from today's presentation.
Thanks very much, Luke. So, as I say, today we've been focusing a little bit around the trifecta of the digital learning experience suite. You'll have your own platform. You may actually be thinking about changing platform. And really, the 6 building blocks are definitely there within, or are available to you within the actual learning experience suite. So we've gone through 6 of them. As I said, I'm very happy if there's any questions you've got, I can pick those up right here, right now. If you do want to actually follow up post-program, if there's anything I can help you with, again, delighted to do that as well. What you can actually do is reach out to me using a number of different methods. Email address, david@dsvirtually. You can connect with me on LinkedIn, or you can follow me on Twitter. There's a lot of different things that I think that we can do to actually create much more impactful, much more effective learning events for our people. If you think about it from the point of view, if we design and build learning, and we bring our people into that, or we provide it to them, and as a result of that learning, nothing changes for them. The skill doesn't get developed, the knowledge doesn't get gained in a great way, or the behavior doesn't change, then we've all failed. And I think what's important is for us to constantly be looking at what is it we're doing, what's working, what's not working, and what can we change. And a large part of that is maybe looking at these 6 building blocks and thinking and looking at what we do in our own organizations, our own learning, and how we can actually adopt them and how we move them forward. You can see at the bottom there, we've got Gamify Your Online Learning worksheet as a download, as well as the PDF of the actual slides themselves. I'm not seeing any questions there in chat. If you do have a question, feel free to actually pop it into the chat or the Q&A for me. If not, I'm going to wish you a wonderful rest of your Tuesday, and I look forward to either continuing the conversation offline you can reach me through those different methods. And then, as I say, enjoy the Tuesday afternoon if that's what you are. For me, it's Tuesday evening. Thank you very, very much